boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this. Unbeaten up-and-coming featherweight from right here in the U.S. of A., Tiaria Brown is going to be returning to action later on this month on the 27th. She was in action late last month on the 23rd. This will be her second fight in the year of 2022. She fought 3 times in 2019, didn't fight at all in 2020 during the thick of the pandemic, returned to action in October of last year, and she was more recently in action in July of this year.
Having faced a lot of experienced fighters,
Many of them journeywomen, some with upside-down records, some without.
unbeaten Tiaria Brown has achieved a #1 spot by way of the IBF's featherweight ranked standings, ranked ahead of Nina Menke of Germany.
Nina Menke, who very recently challenged reigning IBF champion of Denmark, Sarah Mahfoud, for that IBF title, and she came up short. She dropped the decision the way I said she would. I figured Sarah Mahfoud against Nina Menke, she's going to hang on to the blue belt. She's going to hang on to the IBF title, though if she is so confronted with America's own Tiaria Brown, that could be a very different situation with a very different outcome. You get the sense that because Tiaria Brown is already ranked at #1, she is on the cusp of becoming the IBF's mandatory challenger. That's assuming she isn't already.
She's supposed to be returning to action against veteran journeywoman Calista Silgado, who's been in there with a lot of people.
Been in there with a lot of fighters. When it comes to the reigning champion, when it comes to Sarah Mahfoud, she has only fought once in a little over 2 years' time.
Having seen action in April of this year against Nina Menke, doesn't seem to have another fight scheduled.
It'd be an awful waste of a year if she doesn't book another fight before this year is out. There's still plenty of time to get in at least one more fight before she is so confronted with Tiaria Brown, because
She's got to stay sharp. This ain't Nina Menke we're talking about.
or Brenda Carabajal before her. Tiaria Brown is a fighter who I've talked about in passing several times here on the channel over the years. A blue chip prospect, a promising fighter that does a lot of things well, a natural. And if and when
Sarah Mahfoud's got to stay sharp if she wants to hang on to that blue belt.
Sarah Mahfoud, who sports a professional record of 11 wins, no losses, and no draws, with 3 knockouts to Tiaria Brown. Tiaria, who sports a professional record of 12 wins, no losses, no draws, and 8 knockouts. Their quality of competition, believe it or not, is quite similar, and Tiaria Brown has at least 1 more professional contest than Sarah Mahfoud does. Very soon, that could be 2 more fights than Sarah Mahfoud does. She is the, so obviously, more heavy-handed puncher of the two.
Sarah Mahfoud's no brawler. Her bread and butter is her boxing, though the exact same thing can be said about Tiaria Brown.
With difference being that Tiaria is the so obviously more heavy-handed puncher and comes from a solid amateur background. Tiaria Brown poses a grave threat to Sarah Mahfoud's reign as this division's IBF champion.
And it seems that Sarah's on borrowed time.
I'm going to be honest with you. Whether Sarah Mahfoud gets in another fight in this year or not, another fight, another 2 fights, I don't like her chances against Tiaria. I don't like her chances at all.
Tiaria Brown is one of the best kept secrets at or around these weights. Featherweight, super featherweight.
Things at 126 pounds have been pretty quiet, especially now that Amanda Serrano's proposed title defense against Brenda Carabajal has been scrapped, at least until further notice, until it can be rescheduled. There just hasn't been a lot of news coming out of the featherweight division as of late. But this...
Haven't heard much from Erica Cruz, this division's reigning WBA champion.
What this heralds, Tiaria Brown returning to action later on this month, achieving a #1 spot by way of the IBF.
The IBF title potentially changing hands if and when Tiaria Brown locks horns with Sarah Mahfoud.
Because I'm fairly confident she's going to beat Calista Silgado. I'm fairly confident about that. It seems to me that it's just a matter of time before Tiaria Brown puts Sarah Mahfoud in a position where it's fight or flight. Will she fight to keep the blue belt, or will the blue belt be forfeit?
Will she surrender the IBF title to Tiaria Brown when the time comes?
That's a story only time can tell. And just in keeping with the theme of women's featherweight news, Eddie Hearn has dismissed Jake Paul's suggestion that Katie Taylor should move down in weight for the Amanda Serrano rematch. 135 pounds is the lowest she'll go, and somebody needs to tap Jake Paul on the shoulder and let him know how this works, because last I checked, Katie Taylor won the fight.
Yeah.
Katie Taylor won the decision.
Yeah.
And the first time out, it was Matchroom and DAZN that footed the bill, not Most Valuable Promotions. It was nauseating seeing how many people were crediting Jake Paul with getting this fight over the line when Most Valuable Promotions aren't the ones who put this together. They might represent Amanda Serrano, but the funding for the fight, the financing, that came from Matchroom. That came from the DAZN platform. Most Valuable Promotions does business with Showtime. The fight didn't happen on Showtime, did it?
No, it didn't.
So where do you get that Jake Paul's the reason this fight finally got over the line? I will admit that Jake's presence and his involvement, it in some ways raised the fight's profile. But as far as who's really responsible for putting it together, paying the fighters and orchestrating the entire event, the entire situation, that was Matchroom.
Let me tell you something. You let Jake Paul make these kind of comments on your behalf.
It's only making you look bad. Because what this communicates is you don't actually want that rematch. Asking for something you know you're not going to get. Making demands when you're the one that lost the first fight. So you think you're going to turn around and tell Katie Taylor what to do. Tell Katie Taylor where to fight. Katie Taylor beat you.
You lose the first fight, so you're going to make demands in the second one.
Or allow Jake Paul to make those demands on your behalf. It's a bad look for Amanda, who I think earned a lot of people's respect. But it's back to the same old shenanigans. It's back to the same old stuff.
And I've told you guys for years here on this channel that Amanda always had a wavering commitment to the Taylor fight, that Katie wanted it more than Amanda did.
Maybe Jake Paul doesn't know what the hell he's saying. Maybe he doesn't know how it looks. Maybe he is still uninitiated after all this time. But Amanda Serrano knows what time it is. Amanda Serrano knows you can't possibly hope to get Katie Taylor to trim down to 126 pounds when she hasn't fought at that weight since she was a teenager.
Why on earth would Katie Taylor languish attempting to make 126 pounds, a weight she's never made as a professional?
Why would she do that to fight you for your 2 belts when she's in possession of all the belts at her own weight?
Why would Amanda ask her to do that when Amanda knows better?
Or why would Amanda let Jake Paul, on her behalf, ask Katie to do that when Amanda knows better? It's because of what I told you. Amanda has a wavering commitment to the fight.
A wavering commitment to the rematch now.
You know, I don't care if you used to live down the block from Amanda Serrano. I don't care about your tribalism or your flags. I'm just giving it to you straight because it's the only way I know how to give it to you. And you can't be committed to doing the second fight asking for stuff like this. And just in keeping with the theme of all things Jake Paul, Eddie Hearn very recently chimed in on the collapse of what was supposed to be the Rahman Jr. fight, saying there will always be people trying to make sure that he doesn't succeed.
Yeah, but that's really not what's going on here. That's not what led to this fight's collapse.
It's such a mess, the whole thing. Hearn said to the DAZN boxing show, it started with Tommy Fury, it's Rahman, he said, she said, booked out Madison Square Garden. It's a circus. It's just like being in the ring itself. The boxing business is just not that easy. You can't just walk into the ring and become a champion. You can't just pick up the game in the business of boxing and start executing successful live events. The problem will be the reputation of future events. Are we actually going to see these events? I feel a bit for Jake because where he's quite unpopular with his industry, there will always be people trying to make sure that he doesn't succeed. So he has it all against him, and the inexperience of not working in the boxing business, they should have known. It's very unlikely that Rahman Jr. is going to make 200 pounds.
And there's been a lot of focus on that. Whose fault is it really that the fight collapsed?
So I maintain my original position that if this fight really were a successful event, if sales projections were promising, pay-per-view sales, gate revenue, they wouldn't have decided to scrap the whole goddamn thing over 15 pounds. If things were looking encouraging at the box office and at the gate, they would have moved ahead with the fight, but
that's not what we were hearing leading to this fight's collapse. What we were hearing is that tickets weren't moving.
We already know that Rahman Jr. has even less of a profile than Tommy Fury does. Don't forget that Rahman Jr. was a late replacement for Tommy Fury, who was barred from entering into the country due to his tenuous associations with Irish crime boss Daniel Kinahan.
Look, it's not hard to see what happened here. The first chance they got to call this thing off, That's what they did.
If they were expecting big box office numbers and big gate revenue, they wouldn't have let 15 pounds on Hasim Rahman Jr.'s part get in the way of that. They wouldn't have called the fight off a week in advance. They would have let that guy get as low as he can get.
Shed as much of the weight as he can because they're not going to leave all that money on the table. But when it comes to money...
This event wasn't set to generate very much. That's the look of it. Otherwise, they would have went ahead with the fight. They would have. And we've been all through that. The real problem, the real crisis here is that Showtime has pledged fealty to airing Jake Paul's events, airing Jake Paul's fights. Very recently, Stefan Espinoza said...
He said they're in it for the long haul with Jake. He said they're making a long-term commitment to this fighter.
This novelty act, but he's coming up short of options with the second collapse of what was supposed to be the Tommy Fury fight. The Hasim Rahman Jr. late replacement, they couldn't get that over the line. There aren't that many retired UFC fighters floating around.
You're all out of Ben Askren's and Tyrone Woodley's.
The problem with Jake Paul is he is in the beginning stages of his boxing career. He still is. He has under 10 fights after all. And the issue is that you can't groom him and develop him as a fighter the same way you would an actual fighter, an actual prospect, because Showtime doesn't want to put him in harm's way. Not necessarily. They don't want to endanger their investment, putting him in there with actual journeymen that will give him actual work, make him work in actual rounds, and potentially upset him. They don't want to jeopardize their investment, though at the same time, if he is a fighter,
he has to develop. He needs those developmental fights.
You say if that's the case, then why were they going to put him in there with Hasim Rahman Jr.? And there's a compelling theory out there that, you know what, neither Jake Paul nor Showtime were actually committed to doing the Hasim Rahman Jr. fight. That at the first sign of trouble, they decided to call the whole thing off,
and they'd find a way to make it Hasim Rahman Jr.'s fault. He'd be the fall guy.
But Jake Paul, he's somewhat of a draw, but he's not so big a draw that he can carry these events off his name alone. He still needs the right dance partner to make the fight an attractive fight, an appealing fight, where there is some sizzle or some semblance of a sizzle, some semblance of a question.
Is this the night? Is this the fight where Jake Paul finally gets knocked the fuck out?
People don't actually take Jake Paul seriously as a boxer. Not yet, you understand. So in essence, what you're selling is the answer to that question. Which fight will be the fight where Jake Paul finally gets knocked out? Because for the most part, he's still viewed as a glorified internet troll.
Take what he just said about Canelo Alvarez.
And I think Canelo and I is one of the biggest fights that could be made in boxing. And I know I could beat him. People laugh at that. But Dimitri Bivol showed he is very beatable, and I have a style, range, speed, and power similar to Bivol.
Is this guy on drugs?
It's either that or he's willfully trolling the boxing community at large, name-dropping established names and established fighters like Canelo Alvarez as if their names belong in the same sentence with his.
It's the other way around.
The name of Jake Paul don't belong in the same sentence as either Canelo Alvarez or Dimitri Bivol, and I think that goes without saying to a lot of boxing fans, a lot of connoisseurs of the sport. And I don't know if these are just delusions, wild delusions from this social media influencer, or if he's willfully trolling the audience because that's what he's selling.
He might very well be trolling, but he's still coming up short of options.
He might know exactly what he's doing when he makes asinine statements like this one, comparing himself to Dimitri Bivol.
But even if he does know what he's doing, how many manageable situations are left out there for him?
How many more Ben Askrens and Tyrone Woodleys can he conjure up to help raise the profile of his fights, his events? How many more guys like that are floating around?
Because it seems like without those guys, he's struggling to drum up business.
Do you think you can hurt him?
I will hurt him. Yeah. I will hurt Joe.
Little tickle. Little Joe tickle. What's that little Joe tickle? Are you suggesting his power is... Little Joe tickle. Ticklish. Little Joe's going to tickle me.
Yeah, I will.
On September 24th.
Slap you and punch you and everything else.
Oh, right. Ooh, you're hard. Look, clearly they're both hard. Look, I want to put this
Not
to
in
you.
that way.
No.
What, have you been a champion?
Why was you going to... I'll tell
you
you
been a
why.
champion?
No, but you're not champion now, are you?
No, I'm not. Have you ever been champion?
No, not
so
yet.
shut your mouth.
Huh? No, I won't shut my mouth.
Yeah, shut your mouth.
No,
He's
you
the
shut your mouth.
A fighter. He's the
Because
I
we're
won't
on
shut your
BT.
Sorry, I'll tell you what. This is where you get it all wrong. He is the guy who's ranked number 1.
Yes.
You're ranked number 2.
And ranking.
So he's
Yeah,
the
so
A
ranking
I'm the
them
A
network.
and you're the B fighter.
That's it. You got it
Calm
right.
down,
Simple.
little Joe.
Yeah,
Huh?
absolutely.
Little Joe.
Calm down.
Huh?
Relax.
You relax.
Chill.
Even with all his professional experiences, having boxed the likes of Carlos Takam and Andy Ruiz, Anthony Joshua and Dillian White, Derek Chisora, more recently 2 times, dishing out Junior Fa, his first professional loss.
Even having been a former champion and being 7 years younger than Joe Joyce.
Joseph Parker still isn't the comfortable favorite in this thing, is he? He doesn't seem like the more experienced guy. He seems like the more timid guy, the more polite guy, even though he's vastly more experienced as a professional than Joe Joyce is. Joe, who has some size on Joseph Parker, couple of inches.
Couple of inches in height, couple of inches in wingspan.
Both boys are known to have granite chins. Both boys are known to take a great punch, though Joseph Parker has more than 2 times as many fights as Joe Joyce, yet it's Joseph Parker.
I said he's the one that seems green. He's the one that seems timid. Joseph Parker, and the bane for him has always been he's too damn polite.
He lacks killer instinct, and that's what I think today's press conference accented, that Joe Joyce is not normally known as a brash, trash talker.
No, he's not known as a big mouth, but next to Joseph Parker, he might as well be Adrian Broner.
UK version of Ricardo Mayorga, as Joseph Parker struggled to match wits with Joe Joyce as he let him know what he really thinks about him, that he can't hurt him, that he's too little, too timid.
From the moment that this fight became a talking point, before it collapsed, before Joseph Parker walked away initially, I liked Joe Joyce's chances.
Because of Joe Joyce's size, power, and pedigree, because Joe Joyce, for whatever reason, seems to have a better understanding of who he is as a fighter than Joseph Parker, who is vastly more experienced.
Got a far more robust body of work. He seems more malleable as a fighter, shows a better variety of punches.
But he always seems unsure of himself, lacking moxie, lacking gusto, and in a fight with a statuesque pressure fighter, an aggressive guy with a great chin and a great gas tank, you're gonna need dog to keep him off. You're gonna need some kind of dog.
Joe Joyce isn't gonna let Joseph Parker make this a fight of finesse. I know that Joe Joyce has his limitations.
That he can sometimes seem slow and cumbersome.
That he didn't look great against Carlos Takam, but you know what? A couple of years ago, neither did Joseph Parker.
The way I see it, Joe Joyce might open up the favorite in this fight. He's got home field advantage. The fight is happening on his network, on his side of things, under his promotional banner. He's the bigger, more aggressive guy, the more aggressive customer, and I think
I like his chances. I like Joe Joyce in this fight.
to impose his size and power on the former champion, force him to trade and deliver hard shots, deliver hard punches. I'm leaning towards Joe Joyce to win this thing.
It's a good fight.